Hello and welcome to Get Informed, America, the show that breaks through the mainstream media box to bring you real smart news. Hi, I'm Dave Oakenquist, and joining me is the editor of InformedAmerican.com, who also happens to be the smartest man I know, Mr. Rodney Johnson. Rodney, good morning.
Morning, Dave.
How's life treating you in Texas, Rodney? I understand you may have a little bit of a slower internet connection, just to let everybody know. What's going on at home, Rodney?
Well, it's a little struggle. I think it's school back in session now. They're doing a lot more online right this minute, and so it's been a big push and maybe overloading the system down here.
Yeah, see, so, everybody wants kids to go back to school, but I don't. I want everyone to be locked down, or no, I want them all to go to school and do no virtual learning, so that way you
Exactly.
keep the Zoom lines clear for me. Man, Zoom, that's a company we all should have invented just a couple of years ago. It would have been very prescient. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Anyway, Rodney, we're going to get into our topics. And just so everybody knows, Rodney does not know what I'm going to ask him. So although, we're not talking about zoology or anything, although maybe something will come up, but it should be stuff in your wheelhouse. So let's start with a story that you just put out just this morning. Trump barely pulls into lead in latest national poll. Now, we've talked a lot about the polls, Rodney. A lot of our viewers they either don't believe the polls or are suspect about some of the numbers coming out of the major polling outfits. This one in particular comes from Rasmussen. It said President Trump pulls ahead of challenger Joe Biden by 1%. And as you say, it's not much of a lead, but it's within the margin of error of the survey. And it doesn't really necessarily count as a lead because, it's a couple of percent's margin of error, but it does matter. One of the things, a point that you make often when it comes to economic data, and I'm going to just apply it here to polling data, is it's not necessarily the numbers themselves, but the trend in those numbers. Right. And so what are we seeing in the trend over the last couple of weeks?
Well, and like you said, it's the first time that he's had a lead. And so that's interesting in and of itself. And it's certainly the first time that he's been over 45% in terms of likely voters. Now, I want to caution on this. This is a national poll. And so if you are picking up a couple of more voters in the states you're already going to win, it doesn't mean anything.
Right.
And so this is all about, the election is going to be all about these swing states, which I know we beat on, but we got to keep that, top of mind.
Yeah.
And so then it becomes a question of why. And so nobody can say, because the voters that are saying, yes, I would, didn't say a week before, no, I wouldn't, and then this is why or whatever. But you can look around at what's going on and say, well, Trump's message is law and order, and you're seeing the national trend in opinion moving against these protests that have become violent. People saying, hey, that's not what I want. I mean, everybody, or most everybody I've talked to has seen or pointed out, they're all for protests because it's our right in the Constitution, but the violence, not a chance. And so with Trump coming out and getting in front of this and saying, wait a second, you can protest, but all this, arson and the rioting and, all that other stuff, that's got to go.
Yeah.
And so I think that's resonating. And we can't discount people who are leaving Joe Biden. And so it's not as if these people went from undecided to Trump, right? They're actually flipping a little bit. And so are people getting a better look at Joe Biden, a better understanding of what he says he wants to do, and deciding that's not their thing? So I don't know, probably a combination.
Yeah, Biden coming out of the basement, because at some point he has to, and now he's been sort of out and about. Although, and for everybody, for our viewers, they may have seen me attend the Mike Pence rally, which is just a few miles down the road in Clearwater, Florida. And I told him I was looking to see when Biden or Harris or somebody like that would come to the Tampa area, and I'd try to be there myself. Now, just this week, Biden did come to Tampa, Hillsborough County, to talk to 6 veterans. There was no place for me to go there. There was no, like in the Pence rally, there was about, 200 or 300 people in a hotel conference room. No such event for Biden. So I did not have the opportunity to go there. I don't know necessarily what the point of traveling to a state just to meet with a couple of people is, but I guess that shows him going out there.
Well, I mean, it serves a couple of purposes. One, it illustrates what he's trying to get across, is that he is the candidate that's recognizing the seriousness of this situation and the gravitas of the pandemic. And so he's not holding these big events because he feels that it would put people at risk, but he's still out there. And so on the flip side of it, it creates some buzz in the local news. You know he was there meeting with 6 people because the local press is telling you that. And so that's what he needs, is he needs to be top of mind in these battleground states. And you can't do it by, talking about something from, a studio at your home or anything else. You got to show up. Yeah. People talk about it when you show up. And to the point, you just saw Trump hold the rally in Nevada, and people are upset with him, but they all reported it. And so it turns into that free press, right? Which is what he got so much of in the 2016 election cycle, where he didn't spend a nickel, or not very much, on advertising because he didn't have to, because the press was talking about him all the time.
Yeah. Last thing on this poll, now that, as I'm not sure if I mentioned, this is from Rasmussen, so it is a right-leaning poll.
Yep.
Yeah, this isn't exactly Quinnipiac University polling here, but which Biden.
Even their poll, he has not been ahead in their poll, their Washington Watch poll, since they started it 2.5 months ago. And so, even though it's right leaning, I mean, they're not pulling punches on it. So
yeah, and some of the details as well is now I believe this may have been a separate poll, but it said that 52% of likely voters rate Trump's handling of the economy as good or excellent. Now that's up from 39% in mid 2017. That was, I guess, the low point. Now, and then another here, 49% think the president is doing a good job handling national security issues. So 2 points there is the economy. I mean, it seems to me just a function of things are coming back. So now Trump is getting credit for it. That's sort of how I read that. Get your thoughts on that. And then the last thing here on the handling national security issues, 49% approval. Could this be actually voters considering national security as maybe domestic insecurity?
I don't know. It's probably got something to do with that. I mean, taking these in the reverse order, national security first, we would be remiss if we didn't look at the protests and people saying they want to bring down America and, kill the police and light everything on fire as not a threat of some sort. There might not be that many of them. I mean, if you group them all together, I don't know, what is it, a few thousand people? I mean, in a nation of 335 million, it's not that big of a percentage, but it still gets your attention when they're lighting stuff on fire. And it could be that people have watched Trump over his tenure take a hard line on Iran and take a hard line on China and say, look, this is what we're doing with these different situations around the world, where he's not trying to make peace with everybody. He's straight out saying, look, America first. That's my job. That's what we're doing. And the message resonates.
What about
certainly resonates with some.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on either. But what about this recent peace deal between Israel, UAE, Bahrain, and potentially getting some of the Arab states involved here? Could that be maybe playing a role here? It does seem like it's a little bit under the radar. Do you make any bit of this news in terms of helping President Trump's support?
I don't know that it helps him as much as it could, because I think we talked about this last time as well. I mean, he's the only president, in modern history who can make a peace deal in the Middle East and it's not front page news, because he creates such an issue with everything else he says, right? That it kind of overshadows it. But the fact that it's done, I give him a lot of credit for. It's a huge deal. It's a pivot point in the Middle East. I don't think it can be overstated. And so there's a lot of history that is involved in that region, of course, the implacable foes over there who were not going to move. I mean, the Palestinian situation wasn't going to move because it didn't serve anybody's purpose for it to change. In terms of the power brokers, they weren't going to get a better deal by changing their stance. And so if you can get some of these outside-in states, being Bahrain and the other Gulf Emirates, to come along, nobody does anything over there without on that side of the fence, without Arabia giving it their blessing. Now, it's tacit. They don't have to, come out in public and say it's the coolest thing ever. But you don't sign those deals unless the kingdom is on board. Yeah. And so that is an absolutely phenomenal change. And Trump is a big part of it, not just because Jared Kushner put it together, but because he took such a hard line on Tehran. And Tehran is the enemy of the region. I mean, not just directly, but through Hezbollah over in Lebanon and the other things they do. And so it's lining up as an us and them, and we're on the us side, and that's where we want to be. You talked about economics in the first part of that. Great news this week. I mean, fabulous news that median household income reached $68,700 in 2019. And so the highest in history. It expanded by 6.8%, the fastest rise in history. And the poverty rate dropped to 10.5%, which is the lowest since they started keeping records in 1959. And the spread narrowed. And so the inequality, men to women, among the races, from high income to low income, all of that narrowed. 2019 was fabulous in terms of all of those things for income. Now, it's COVID, right? We're in the land and time of COVID. And so 2019 might as well be 1,000 years ago. Yeah. But when you say Trump did a better job on the economy, well, you look at what went on and it was pretty good years. I'm not a fan of all the debt. I don't think that we can handle this long term, but my goodness, you look at what people earned in income and it was pretty good.
Yeah, and now let's stay with the economy a little bit, Rodney. Something that you always have a keen, you have your eyes and ears to the ground on the financial stuff, what's going on with finance, and you write about that as well. So let's. I want to bring up a story here from WallStreetWireNews.com. Latest electric vehicle IPO could provide unique entry into a growing market. And this one begins to say, as the adage goes, you don't want to be a gold miner as much as most of them go broke. Instead, you want to be the merchant that sells them picks and shovels. And now we could be seeing an opportunity here in the investment world in terms of electric vehicles. Since it's been hard for investors to get a pure play on charging stations thus far, but that could be about to change. A company called ChargePoint Inc., one of the world's oldest and largest electric vehicle charging networks, is about to reverse merge with Switchback Energy Acquisition Corp. Ronnie, what could this mean for investors?
Well, it gives you a chance to own it. And so that's a big deal because, you can buy Tesla. Tesla, it is what it is, right? They've never made a nickel selling cars. Yeah. They make their money by selling credits for emissions to other car makers. But it gives you a chance to buy that infrastructure that everybody's going to need, because people keep talking about, having millions and millions of electric cars, but they don't address the situation where you can drive down the road and see 20 gas stations in 5 miles and no charging stations. And so people are like, oh, well, you're going to charge at home. It's like, really? Are you really? I mean, Dave, is your garage set up for 2 cars to be charged every night?
No.
So exactly. And so most people don't have that luxury. Most people right now who are charging their cars at home, they bought a $100,000 Tesla. And if you can spend $100,000 on a vehicle, you probably have some means. Now, I know that the Model 3's out there and it's selling more and it's 40-something thousand, but still, I mean, you're probably of some means. We know that's who their client base is. And so when you get into the average guy buying the average car, not to mention the average townhome or apartment dweller who's renting and it's not anywhere near their place where they live. So what are they going to do to charge these vehicles? And as you add more cars that need to be charged, the charging stations you have are going to be overrun. I mean, the ones at the airport, the ones at, municipal parking garage. And so we're going to need a phenomenal rollout of infrastructure building to support electric vehicles. And charge point and charging stations are the thing. Now, I've said many times, you need the electricity too. And so, I mean, people are looking around and saying, gee, I want, green electricity. Well, you really want steady electricity. That's the name of this game. And so there's a couple of components in there. ChargePoint doing a reverse merge with Switchback. Like I said, it's going to give people an opportunity to get involved and perhaps get involved on the ground floor, like buying Tesla, I don't know, whenever they went public back in 2012 or whatever it was. And so could give you an opportunity there that's just as big, if not bigger, because this will serve many different cars instead of just one.
Yeah. Now, okay. So let's think about what this world that we're talking about that you believe certainly is coming, what that might look like. You mentioned charging stations in certain places. Certainly, there's plenty of gas stations with multiple pumps and all that. There's like a Thornton's right down the street with I think like 30 pumps. It's like crazy. And just about a mile down the road is a Walgreens with an electric vehicle charging station. It's a single parking space. That's all it is. And right. I think about it, how does this work practically, Rodney? These things have to become more efficient. So in other words, I go to Walgreens and okay, so let's just say I get that spot. I mean, how much is maybe 10 minutes of charging going to get me? Or does it need to be something where everywhere, or there's like half the parking lot is full of charging stations or something like that? What does this actually look like?
Well, so it's going to come in stages. The first one is the cars on the road right now, you're not going to get much out of 10 minutes. And so you need a supercharging station, and your vehicle has to accept such a charge. And you need a place where you can park it for half an hour.
Right.
And so the original idea was you put it at restaurants, you put it at shopping malls, you put it at retail shops, places where people are going to spend reasonably 20, 30, 40 minutes an hour, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
You put it outside a nice restaurant and people can actually charge. Now you're mixing two things. You're mixing a task with a pleasure. And so do you really want to say, oh, let's go to Saltgrass because I can get the charging station for 30 minutes? And by the way, you can only get it if one other person having dinner that hour is not using it.
Right.
And so the problem is, since we don't wait in line for those things, we're not at the ready to roll over time after time after time. And so there's going to be an app for scheduling where you get in line, blah, blah, blah. Somebody's going to figure that one out pretty quickly. I'm not worried about that. But the other thing is, and it's something I believe we talked about last week or a couple of weeks ago, there's a new company who is bringing solid state lithium batteries to market, and they're also reverse merging, a company called QuantumScape. And so their battery can go further, more density per weight unit than the current lithium ions, and it can accept up to 80% charge in 15 minutes.
Oh, wow.
That's the game changer. When you get under 15 minutes, it's like, okay, now you kind of got something. And so when we see those two things merge, more charging stations and batteries accepting charge at a faster rate, that's where it starts to be interesting, right? Because it's hard to picture yourself at a gas station for 35, 40 minutes once it's your turn. Think about being third in line. So now you're 2 hours because everybody gets 30 minutes before you get yours. Yeah. And so it's hard to see yourself in line at a gas station for 2 hours, but you can certainly see yourself spending 20 minutes, 30 minutes there every 400 miles to get the extra charge.
Really interesting stuff here as this world is rapidly evolving. So I appreciate you keeping an eye on that and maybe pointing some people to some potential opportunities if they want to get into that space. Rodney, let's stick with politics a little bit as it then stick with the economy a little bit, and then as it relates to politics. I got a story here from CNBC that just completely floored me. It says Yelp data shows 60% of business closures due to the coronavirus pandemic are now permanent. It says as of August 31st, over 163,000 businesses have told Yelp that they're closed and they're not going. And then, so almost 100,000 of those are permanent. This is, as we talk about the economy coming back a bit and things looking up in certain ways. I mean, the destruction of most of these, the vast majority of these are small businesses, sole proprietors most likely. This is not good, Rodney. And what does this future look like? Just ghost towns? What are we going to look at here, and how long is this going to last?
What we're seeing here, of course, is these small businesses can't make their rent. They can't get enough clients in the door, or no clients, and so it's a matter of who's going to survive to the next level. And it really does favor large businesses. If you're a mom and pop coffee shop, then your opportunity to remain in business might be pretty limited because will your landlord renegotiate with you? Will he help you out? I don't know. But Starbucks has some power. And so there's no question that Starbucks is still going to be around. And so what I think we're going to see, and most of the businesses that they talked about in that Yelp story are restaurants, bars, beauty salons, and even small retail shops like gift shops and things like that. Yeah. And so what I think you're going to see is in the short term, you're going to see people migrate back to the larger national chains because they're the ones that can survive. But then you're going to see kind of a resurgence of these businesses over the next couple of years. What's really going to change is the character of the lease, because where leases used to be, $3,000 a month for the space, people are rapidly moving to a shared revenue lease where the landlord will take $1,000 a month plus X% of your revenue. And so in the good times, you're having to give more away, but in the bad times, you get a bit of a break. And so I think that's what's going to happen more.
Now, this is all, or 90%, most of it, or almost entirely government imposed. And a story here from InformedAmerican.com from you, Rodney. Federal judge rules that Pennsylvania lockdown was unconstitutional. The quote here says, while those restrictions were well-intentioned, good intentions towards a laudable end are not alone enough to uphold governmental action against a constitutional challenge. Indeed, the greatest threats to our system of constitutional liberties may arise when the ends are laudable. The intent is good, especially in a time of an emergency. Now, where's the redress? Government, you forced me out of business. I mean, is there anything, especially in particular, maybe in a state like Pennsylvania, could there be a lawsuit or something for you? You made me close down, and that order to make me close down and lose my business was unconstitutional, Rodney. This has got to have a lot of people fired up and angry.
I'm sure it does, but there is no redress. You don't get something back from the government when they do this, particularly in a situation like this where they didn't do it to a person. They did it to entire groups, and they did it, as they say, for a laudable reason. Turns out to be unconstitutional, so they can't kill the ants.
They just bombed the thing and killed everything in the house or something.
Well, and this follows on the ruling in Wisconsin, right, where they ruled their lockdown unconstitutional as well. And so I think it's not redress in terms of getting back what you lost. I don't think that's going to happen. But it's hopefully setting the stage for perhaps a different path the next time around. And there will be a next time where people will think, and it's not going to look just like this, right? The old Mark Twain thing, right? History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And so I think people are going to look back whenever something of size comes and says, hey, wait a second, let's remember COVID-19. Let's remember what we did with this, using a sledgehammer for this. And let's see if we could, instead of using a broadsword, let's use a scalpel and try to tailor it the best we can. And particularly make it fluid, where we have those break points or those end dates come up much sooner. 10 days, 15, 25, 45, instead of waiting 90 days and saying, let's readdress it much more often to see if we can get back people into their businesses as soon as possible.
Yeah, have some clear guidelines. And that does seem to be lacking. And I'll give you just a small example. It's not a business, but in my townhome association, they still have the public pool lockdown with no real explanation other than a worry of liability. And, people are like, what the heck? And most places have opened. For whatever reason, ours isn't. And there's no, to the point of, there's no like, okay, so we're at this level now, so then we can reopen, and then I think, how can a business owner plan for something similar to that, which is what we saw from some of these state governments. I mean, even with this phasing stuff, we go up to phase 3 and we got to go back to phase 2 kind of thing. And that's sort of not clear messaging and not allowing people as well to take some sort of a risk into their own hands, Rodney.
Well, and the backside of that is exactly what you mentioned. We're essentially held hostage to a lot of these backstop businesses like insurance companies that get to dictate the rules, whether they are well-founded or not, because frankly, associations like yours can't afford it. They just can't. And so, it's like standing in front of the TSA agent when you're trying to get on a plane and he says, well, you can't take this thing through. And you go, oh no, I know the rules. Yes, I can. Yeah, you still can't get on the plane,
That's it. Yeah.
Exactly. The gatekeeper's the gatekeeper.
Yeah. And, and I'm sure everyone's crying a river for me not be able to swim in my pool. But it is an illustration of that kind of mentality we're seeing nationwide with this kind of a thing. Speaking of, Rodney, I want to end with some comments from Attorney General Bill Barr. And on this topic, I don't know if you saw these or not, but one of the things he said in relating to lockdowns, he called it, quote, the greatest intrusion on our civil liberties other than slavery, Rodney. Strong words. He says, to put a national lockdown, stay-at-home orders, it's like a house arrest. Other than slavery, which is a different kind of restraint, this is the greatest intrusion on civil liberties in American history. He says governments do what bureaucrats always do, which is they defy common sense. They treat free citizens as babies who can't take responsibility for themselves and others. What do you think of that comment from Bill Barr?
Well, I think he's overstepping. I mean, people who are students of history, and Bill Barr is a smart guy, should know that Abraham Lincoln did away with the writ of habeas corpus during the Civil War, so he could throw anybody in jail he wanted without cause. Clearly wanting to say, hey, I think they're a problem for the war effort, but still, there were a lot of things that intruded on our civil liberties between the lockdown here and slavery. So I'm not about that that characterization at all. But his point remains that what you've done is deprive people of their right of freedom of assembly, free assembly. You've deprived people of due process. and separated them from their assets, being their businesses and other things. And you haven't shown a really good reason as to why. You've shown a worry, you've shown a concern that everybody shares and understands, but you haven't shown how this action is going to specifically address those concerns in a way that gives you that ability to override the constitutional rights. And if you just said, look, anytime you declare a national emergency, you can do that, it's like, well, who gets to declare a national emergency? That would be the same government that wants to restrict your rights. That doesn't seem like much of a check and balance system.
No, not at all. Barr had some other comments, Ronnie. I'd like to get your feedback on. He story from the Wall Street Journal. Barr tells prosecutors to consider charging violent protesters with sedition. So basically, if you're advocating, I guess the idea here is if you're a part of a group, let's call them Antifa or whatever, who advocates for the overthrow of the United States government, and then as part of your action is violence against, say, a local government, that could be considered sedition. What do you think of that? Is that overcharging?
I think it's the definition of sedition.
Okay,
I think he's clear, and how could it be any different, right? If I want to overthrow the government, and I tell people, look, I want to overthrow the government, and I'm going to start overthrowing the government by trying to get rid of the police in my town, and I'm going to walk over to the police department, I'm going to fill a bottle of gasoline, shove in a piece of a t-shirt, light it on fire, and throw it through a window. Clearly, I've committed arson. Clearly, I've committed a number of other offenses. But my goal, as I stated it, was to create a domino effect to overthrow the government of the United States of America. I may be a raging idiot for trying to do it this way and have absolutely no chance of success, but I'm still guilty of the crime of wanting to do this. And so in my world, I think he's on point. Yeah. And these people's statements and their actions are the clearest indication of what they say they want to do. When you hold a sign that says, "Death to America, end of America, overthrow the government," and then you start burning things, I think people can put those together.
How about a sign that says "Burn it all down," and then you is that clear?
And then you burn it all down, right? And so what we're coming back to is the same thing that we hit here often, but we don't often say out loud. It's responsibility for your actions. You bear responsibility for your actions. And while it might be separated some, and we're seeing that in some of these protests where people are not bearing any responsibility, eventually we all hope it comes back to you so that you have to answer for your actions, because that's how our system is built. And if you don't do it, then you've ruined the system we have, which is called the rule of law, where all laws apply to all people equally. And once you end that, the wheels come off. So.
Yeah, this story continues. To bring a sedition case, prosecutors would have to prove that there was a conspiracy to attack government agents or officials that pose an imminent danger, legal experts said. Now, I think there is plenty of evidence for that from Portland, specifically going after government agents in that case, at least, right?
Well, and yes, and to your point, I mean, they weren't going after local police officials at the beginning. They were, but then once the federal officers showed up at the courthouse, they were specifically going to challenge and engage the federal officer. Mm-hmm. And it can't be more direct than, I went to the federal courthouse because that's where the federal officers were, so I started the fire there. I mean, I don't know. Seems pretty clear.
Yeah, me too. And last bit about Barr, you may have seen this. Bill Barr's asked the DOJ to look in at charging Portland officials and for the BLM violence, along with the Seattle mayor for allowing the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or whatever they're calling it, to just go up and allow a police-free zone for all that time. So This would be sort of, and this maybe goes back to what we were talking about just a little while ago, was where's the responsibility for the government for a lot of the stuff that goes on in terms of lockdowns. Now, in terms of what you might call gross negligence in a city or intentional negligence, that may be a step too far. But I'd be curious what you think about this. Actually, hold on. Let me rephrase that. Let me rephrase that.
Okay.
To what extent what point would charges have to be brought against, say, a mayor if they're completely derelict or negligent in their duty? What would be the threshold for something like that? Now, it doesn't have to be the Seattle mayor here. It doesn't have to be our favorite, America's favorite mayor, Ted Wheeler, out of Portland. So I'm not talking about theft, bribery, embezzlement, but this kind of thing. At what level would it take?
Well, unfortunately, the answer is local. Because statutes are written for each city. And so everybody's got their own threshold as to what they believe constitute enough of a dereliction of duty, enough of a failure to perform your duties to remove you from office. And typically, it's a vote by a city council, or it could be a recall vote in the general population. But I don't think this has to go that far. I don't know that Barr has standing or the DOJ has standing in something like the Capitol Hill thing in Seattle. In Portland's interesting to me because it's something we talked about at the beginning as the courthouse thing was going on, and Mayor Kate Brown and Governor Ted Wheeler were saying, hey, the feds need to leave. Yeah. I said that, look, they should leave, and they should leave with the understanding, the written understanding, that the city would safeguard the courthouse, and any damage would have to be paid for by the city. And so in my world, that's the federal standing. If the federal property was damaged, the city should pay for it because you allowed it to happen. Yeah. And so I think businesses and citizens, homes, whatever, that have been damaged in these cities, they're the ones that have standing to go back to the city officials and say, this happened because you did not enforce the law. And it's really clear you didn't enforce the law. And your reason for it doesn't really matter. You didn't do your job. And so, one, the city should reimburse me for my damage. And two, you should be removed from office. And so I think those are the ones that have standing. It's going to be very interesting. Whether or not it's going to happen in Portland, I don't know. I think I would be surprised if you don't see this in both Kenosha and in Minneapolis. Because, you know what? These are middle America cities. And yeah, Minneapolis is a little bigger, 400,000, but still kind of a middle America sentiment. It's like, wait a second. You allowed all this to happen, and I'm having to deal with all the aftermath and the cleanup and the rebuild, and you're doing nothing. And so I would be surprised if we don't see those sorts of lawsuits show up.
Yeah, I think so too. And I don't know what came of that Seattle lawsuit from those business owners from CHAP, but it was in the billions of dollars. And I think very quickly after that, Seattle's like, yeah, maybe we want to break this thing down. So yeah, I think lawsuits and monetary damages is probably the way to go, and leaving it up to the voters. I mean, Portland is a pretty lefty city, but I don't know the extent. Well, it would just be another Democrat, but any other Democrat probably besides Ted Wheeler.
I'm a big fan of people choosing, right? I always want government to drop to the lowest level that can perform the task. And so federal oversight of Portland is not on my radar. Let the Portlandians, I'm not sure how they describe themselves, but let them pick their own government and deal with it. And if they think all this is okay, it's theirs, right?
I guess so.
It is.
It's yours to allow to I don't know, fall apart, I guess. Yeah, and people could just they'll end up moving out, voting with their feet, I guess, as we're seeing out of places like New York City. Do you have any thoughts on that, city exoduses, before we get out of here?
I think that's a big thing, and I think it's going to be a long thing. So you're seeing some companies come back. And so companies are recognizing that you do lose something when people are not together. You lose creativity, you lose the bonds among peers. And so businesses do want people back in the office, but it's not going to be like it was. Mm-hmm. And so this move into suburbs, this move to telecommute is real, long-lasting, and long-term. And so cities around the nation that got used to a very high level of tax revenue and a very high level of mass transit in for work are going to have to deal with that. New York City, if my numbers are right, it was like 4.5 million people was the population of New York. But every day, another 3.5 million people commuted into the city to work. Wow. And so this is a phenomenal influx of capital that shows up in mass transit in terms of buying tickets for the subway and the bus or whatever. People buying a cup of coffee, buying lunch, doing whatever they do, taking their shoes to get repaired, shopping at stores, and tax revenue. Depending on where you live, this might not hit your radar, but if you work in a city like New York, you have to pay the New York City income tax. And so you can live in Jersey, but you are paying New York State income tax and New York City income tax. And so once you're no longer crossing the bridge, you're not paying those taxes anymore. Yeah. And so, believe me, New York City in particular, New York State to an extent, are going to feel a huge tax hit from this.
Yeah, I think I saw Governor Cuomo basically begging people to come back, essentially.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He was saying he would take hedge fund managers to dinner, right? And in New York City, their estimate is they're going to be now $9 billion. $9 billion. It's a big number for just a city.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that's certainly a trend we will keep our eye on. Ronnie, I want to thank you for coming on and discussing all these topics with me. I hope you all enjoyed this discussion. Let's go ahead and comment down below. Let us know your thoughts. If you're watching here on Facebook, please hit the like button and share this video with your friends. If you're watching on YouTube, also please hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. And we all want you to head on over to WallStreetWireNews.com, where we brought up that electric vehicle IPO story. So definitely an opportunity for investors as well. We want you to head on over to the site that Rodney edits, InformedAmerican.com, where you can get real smart news in your inbox. Rodney, over the next coming days, when people head on over there and they share their email and they get a story in their inbox, what kind of stories can they look forward to getting?
Well, I think the stories are going to be obvious. It's going to be political. I mean, the closer we get to election, I mean, the time is getting short. The messages are getting sharper. And so we're closing in on that first debate. We're, I don't know, a week and a half away or whatever it is, 2 weeks away. And so we'll see what happens. And so I'm interested. I'm interested to see how all this pans out.
Yep, we got first debate on September 29th. No, I didn't hear a response from the Biden campaign if he was willing to go on Joe Rogan. I think they're just going to ignore the question.
I think they are too.
But we will keep an eye on all of that. So again, thank you all for watching. For Rodney Johnson, I'm Dave Oakenquist, telling you to get informed, America.
You've been listening to Get Informed, America, brought to you by the Informed American Radio Network. Please like and subscribe today in order to get new exclusive weekly episodes. Any questions, thoughts, or comments can be sent directly to info@informedamerican.com. And don't forget to visit informedamerican.com to keep up with real, smart news. Until next time, fight fake news and find common ground.